Hello, I'm Spencer, and in this presentation, I'm going to talk about what does it look like to become a scientist or an engineer, or both. The motivation behind this presentation is that when I was in high school, I enrolled in a bioengineering program for college, or I got into the College of Engineering to study bioengineering. In any case, I didn't really get the full idea of what research looked like. In some aspects, it is as cool as it looks in movies. In other aspects, there's a little bit of to everything, there's something mundane. And so hopefully for this presentation, this will give you a better idea of what it looks like to do research if you are a student who is going to do research in the future, or you're just someone who's a little bit curious. Um, okay, so about me. Hi, I'm Spoon. I have a bachelor's in science and bioengineering and a minor in biological sciences. I have studied, I've done research in a lot of different labs for being this early in my career. I've worked in 5 labs across my university and in the United States National Laboratory System. And thus far, I have participated in 4 publications, 3 of which I am first author, and the 4th I am a contributing author, which means I am later in the list of authors on the beginning of the article. These publications are journal articles. That is to say, I have a wide background and I have some experience with the whole research process. Now, there are a few disclaimers to this presentation. This is a personal project. I'm not being funded or endorsed by an institution, which means I've only put so much time into this presentation, and no one has reviewed this. This is all my own work. But there is the benefit in that I get to be as unprofessional or professional as I would like. And, after doing a lot of presentations and talks, it is nice to have a little bit of freedom here. Um, Although I have worked in a lot of different labs with a lot of different research, that it still doesn't mean I have done research in all fields of study. For instance, psychology. And so I will try to talk about science and engineering as much as I can in a general sense, but I am not going to truly get the whole picture. I'm also early in my career. I'm going to focus on talking on early career. Maybe it would be important to talk about what does it look like in later career, but I haven't gotten there yet. I've talked with a lot of people and networked, but I just want to talk about what I am very familiar with myself. This presentation will cover some fun and non-fun aspects of science. To anything, there's fun and not fun aspects. But if you're interested in getting into science, engineering, research, it would be good to know the fun and not fun parts. And then finally, I am giving this presentation in January of 2026. Things change and they can change very quickly. And so I hope that if you are watching this now, there are things that I will be talking about that have not expired. For instance, if I were giving a presentation like this 40 years ago, I probably would be talking more about the library rather than doing research by looking through online journal articles. And I imagine 40 years in the future right now, hopefully analyzing science will be well assisted by AI, um, which hopefully will reduce the amount of time that people like me have to read through lots and lots and lots of papers. So hopefully, if you won't be going to college for a while or won't be doing research for a while, not so much has changed that would leave this presentation obsolete. Or maybe it has and things will be easier. In any case, those are my disclaimers. All right, let's get into this. I've been talking for 5 minutes. Science and engineering, what does it look like? All right, so a scientist and an engineer often, more often than not, work together or they're the same person. Like me, I'm more of a scientist than an engineer, but I straddle both science and engineering. So a scientist gets information and an engineer makes things. A scientist experiments to learn and discover. An engineer experiments to determine if what they're making works well or not. Scientists need engineering and engineers need science. They're very much intermeshed. For instance, if a scientist is going to do an experiment, they may need lab equipment. Guess who makes lab equipment? Engineers. Sometimes the lab equipment they want aren't immediately available for purchase. Maybe it's because it's really expensive, but also because the thing they need might not exist yet. And so they may need an engineer or to do engineering to make the tools they need to do their experiment. On the flip side, an engineer needs science to understand what it is they're trying to make, how to determine is what they make working, and to just understand what's going on overall. So engineering needs science, science needs engineering. Unfortunately, uh, there are some less magical parts to science, engineering, and research, and that is money, funding, and time. One thing that you should really appreciate is the importance of money, funding, and time. At least for scientists who are working in a public institution like a university or a national lab, a lot of effort is put into research proposals, finding ways to fund projects, and then while they're working on projects, continuing this process over and over again. Money also determines what kind of research is being done, uh, which is good and bad. On the plus side, it means that what you do is more dynamic. The things that people want to fund might change over time, so you might be working on one thing, and then over time you'll have to work on another. Um, Overall, this is definitely a career where you're constantly learning things. You have to learn new things, you have to adjust, evolve, um, which, depending on what kind of person you are, can be fun or stressful, or both. Uh, so yeah, if you are someone like me who has done a lot more experimentation and writing and reading rather than trying to start new experiments and get funding and money, make sure you really appreciate the people who do this sometimes very stressful work. All right, so what does it look like when I'm working? For the most part, it's I think it's really uninteresting to watch. I spend a lot of time on a computer. I'm either reading a lot of papers, so many papers, journal articles, theses, dissertations, conference proceedings, um, also self-studying, like reading textbooks. I like watching YouTube videos of people using instruments or lab instruments or explaining different scientific things before I get into a textbook, which often is a little bit more complicated to read. So yeah, just a lot of work beforehand to understand what I'm doing in an experiment later, um, and also to put into a final report. And then, going to the right side of the slide, you can see me in a lab coat wearing splash goggles, and I also have a radiation dosimeter, which I have to hide with my phone. I think I have to hide. In any case, these are the more cool moments of doing science, engineering, and research, where you're in a lab, maybe you're handling chemicals, watching really interesting things happening. Maybe you're using really expensive and cool equipment, which I think is really fun. I have down here a picture. This is a picture of a setup for an experiment using a particle accelerator, which I think is really cool. And then once you do your lab work, it is cool, and then it can also be really boring where you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. Once this is done, then I go back to working on a computer again to write down everything I did, create figures, create plots, explain what I did, show cool images of data and stuff. You can see here I have on the computer screen I'm working on a poster. And here I pasted a figure I worked on in another poster. So yeah, I'm trying to highlight in this slide and talking about this slide, the before, during, and after of experimentation. Getting further into the after, the keystone, I think that's a great way of putting it, keystone of research, engineering, science, is publications. If scientists, engineers did their work and never told anyone about it, then they haven't really made any change to the world. And so scientists and engineers publish their work or give it to the company that's funding them in the form of maybe written reports, articles, theses, conference proceedings, patents. That's more relevant to engineers. And this is how their findings and works are disseminated, spread, so that people can build off them, or it can directly lead to real-world changes. Science can also be shared through conferences and symposiums in which people are orally speaking to people. Of course, this whole process has its own levels of time, money, and funding. It costs money to publish. People need to review what you did to make sure you did it right, and then it can cost money to access these publications. But this one right here that I worked on is open access on micro machines. So if you search up transit time theory for a droplet passing through a slit in pressure-driven low Reynolds number flows, you can find this and read it. And that is publicly available science that I worked on with my team in 2023. Here is a slide that's showing in a artistic word format what my jobs have looked like. There's some experimentation, there's some experimental design, but there's a lot more to it than getting to do cool things in the lab. And some of it is cool. For instance, literature review, this is where you're reading what people did in the past with their experiments. This can be really interesting because sometimes people get really cool results or they try cool things to do their experiments. And then sometimes academic literature can be really dry and boring, so sometimes this is fun, sometimes it's not. Writing, I do not like writing, but it is a necessary part of research. You have to be able to tell people what you did and what you found. Plotting, I think, is actually really fun. It's like an artistic outlet for me. And that's just how you show people lots of data in a more simple format. But yeah, there's a lot of research that is not so glamorous, and there are parts where it is quite glamorous. You get to use cool instruments and do cool experiments. All right, here is with regards to hierarchies. For me, I have worked in mostly public institutions in which I start the lab and work on a project until it's in completion or my internship ends. So this is a general summary of what that's looked like for me. Here I am. I do research. I do the before research, I do the experimentation, and then I write reports, progress reports, journal articles, posters. And then here's my boss, whose title is either group leader, principal investigator. There's a lot more titles than that. But their job consists a lot of time being spent proposing research to do, finding funding so that the research can be done. That also includes determining what projects are done. So my boss tells me what to work on. They also provide mentorship to the people working for them. They also do their own research. They also work with other groups, and then bosses have their own bosses. And then I also work, in addition with my boss, with other people who include graduate students, consultants, associates, interns. These people have also given me mentorship. They have their own research, they have their own theses. Sometimes they participate in research proposals and finding funding. And then not depicted in this slide are the people I work with indirectly, or the people that help make sure what I do happen. That includes maintenance staff, people who are in operations, people who are in environmental health and safety, institutional review boards, and people keeping the buildings clean where I work. So this is showing my more frequent interactions when I'm in a lab, and then also the amount of people, effort, and time that goes into making sure everything is running smoothly. All right, so why do research and science and engineering? Hopefully, it all ends up making the world a better place. And that's part of my passion of why to do this. For other people, um, there is a lot of money to be made with some research. And then there's a mixture of both. For me personally, it is passion. Also, I just really like learning things, and that's motivation to be involved for me to do research, and also to get to do cool things. Um, and I would like to make a job out of it, so yes, I do want some money out of this. But yeah, I would like to do work that makes the world a better place, and I get to learn cool things at the same time. Now, before you get into research, engineering, and science, it's important to remember to do quality work, safe work, and meaningful work. For science, um, sometimes what you work on, you end up getting results that you won't like, or it's uninteresting. That's just the nature of science, so be prepared for that. You are going to be disappointed at some point with what you do. Remember to do safe work. Um, don't get carried away with trying to get a result or find something or make something and then forget about how dangerous it can be. So make sure that you are keeping yourself and others safe. And then meaningful work. I have the strong desire to just do cool things, but it's also important to remember why you're doing it. It's for improving healthcare or making sure electronic devices don't break or understanding why they break. So it's always important to remember when you're doing science, engineering, or research to know why you're doing it and what is the intended impact. So this concludes what I wanted to talk about. I covered a lot of different things. I showed a few pictures of like when I was wearing a lab coat or when I was doing an experiment with a particle accelerator, and those are some of the most fun things I think are about doing science. Then some of the mixed glamorous and not glamorous things, which would include uh, reading and writing, and then some of the more stressful parts, which would be limited time or the amount of time it takes to do things, and then the money that is needed for research to happen. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask me and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. But hopefully right now you have an idea of what it looks like for me and what it might look like for you getting into an early career in science, engineering, and research. And I hope you found this a little bit interesting. And yeah, have a great day. Bye.